mute themselves. And I want to welcome everyone. It is Monday evening, November the 6th, 2023. And we are here at Temple Beth Shalom, and we are honored and privileged to have Thane Rosenbaum with us tonight. Thane is, and we talked about this earlier, Thane does a number of things and has a number of talents, but I'm only going to focus on a few tonight, and that is in his expertise in areas of being a legal analyst and being a Middle Eastern analyst, and has been on a number of media sites and interviews for these past number of weeks. And we've asked Thane to join us tonight to help us understand the changing narrative, the narrative that began tragically on Saturday, October 7th, with the massacre of over 1,400 people. And less than a month later, with this rising tide of global anti-Semitism. How did things change? How did things shift? How do we understand what's happening in the world around us? And so again, we don't want to waste time. Tonight's format will be Thane will lead us in discussion. We will then open it up for Q&A in the chat boxes, and I will forward the questions to Thane, and we will end by 8 p.m. So welcome everyone, and welcome Thane, and nice to have you with us.
Thanks so much, Mark. I'm speaking from Brooklyn, but I'm speaking to the people from my hometown. And I've actually appeared a couple times, right, Mark, at Beth Shalom over the years. Mark wanted to talk about this idea of the changing narratives. I've done a number of these around the country, and some of them are fixated more on what I call word distortion, which is the misapplied use of language that has pretty much gone unrebutted. Words like genocide and ethnic cleansing and apartheid and settler colonial enterprises. And so I find that Jews often stand, in utter befuddlement and have no response to that. And yet you hear those words being chanted in the street. So we can talk about that during question and answer, and I might touch upon some of these. But instead, I thought I would talk about 4 areas where the shift of narrative has been very clear, and maybe explain them, each one of them. But before I even tell you the 4 categories, I should say, no matter what I say for the next 45 minutes, the real reason is anti-Semitism. There's nothing, what you're really seeing is the normalizing and sanitizing of, ancient Jewish hatred that is being expressed and wrapped in a human rights umbrella, covered under this sort of idea that Palestinian human rights and freedom of speech around those human rights are really what this is about, instead of really coming up with a really clever way. We've lost Christian anti-Semitism of Jews killing Christians in order to make matzah. We've moved ahead from that to the racial anti-Semitism of Adolf Hitler. And what I would say is we are being experiencing for many years, but the United States has somewhat been insulated from it. Hey, Mark, are you seeing? I'm only seeing Judy.
Oh, hi,
Yeah.
Hi, Thane.
Yeah,
Hi, Judy. I don't know. Yeah, the only one I'm seeing is you.
Oh, okay. No, I
Yeah.
just want you to know.
Yeah, and please mute yourself, everyone except Thane.
So what we have is sort of progressive Islamist anti-Semitism. That's what this iteration of it is. So here, 4 areas that we'll talk about: the laws of war, what's happening on college campuses, what's happening on the streets of major cities around the world, and the Biden administration. Those 4 categories, and how there's been a shift in those stories. First is, you started off on October 8th with everyone saying, This was a massacre, a slaughter. It was barbaric, savage, and Israel has a right to defend itself. I immediately, in my media appearances, said, watch how fast that changes from the right to defend themselves to not having the right to defend themselves. Article 51 of the United Nations Charter says that all nations have the right to defend themselves. And so, this is essentially a right of self-defense. Israel did not start the October 7th war. In fact, there was a ceasefire for years with Gaza and Hamas, which was broken on October 7th. And what you're seeing now is legitimate laws of war under the Charter of the United Nations, self-defense. But there's also the Fourth Geneva Convention, which you may heard about, and that's oftentimes kicked around because that addresses the question of civilians. What can happen to civilians in the context of war? What special protections need to be made for civilians? What we know is that civilians can't be targeted, but civilians can be killed pursuant to collateral damage, right? And there's no violation of the rules of war or the laws of war, or the rules of engagement, simply by collateral damage, right? Targeting is one thing, collateral damage is entirely another. So we're getting now a fuzziness between Israel targeting Hamas with collateral damage being Palestinian civilians, and instead coming across as if the Fourth Geneva Convention is being violated because Israel is actually targeting civilians and committing genocide. We could talk about the word genocide again, how misapplied that is in this context. But remember, World War II, the Allies bombed the crap out of Dresden, and 30,000 people were killed. There was no talk of humanitarian corridors at that time. The dropping of the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, there was no talk of, was there an internet connection? There was no talk of leaflets or door knocks or ways that the American allies said to all the Japanese, please get the hell out of there, go to another country because we're dropping an atomic bomb on you. In the ever never-ending double standard against Israel, it's only Israel that is allowed to defend themselves as long as they don't kill any Arabs. So you have a self-defense, but if you kill Arabs, then all of a sudden it's now a war crime. But let's just be clear about, we've seen this before, civilians get killed, just we've never seen protests in this context. By the way, Arabs kill Arabs all the time. No one cares. 500,000 Arabs have been killed during the Syrian civil war. 500,000 Arabs. I don't know of one protest on a college campus or any of the cities around the world at a single. And many of those people were gassed by Assad, the president of Syria. It's only when Jews kill Arabs does it seem to become an international incident. The problem with the Fourth Geneva Convention here, the matter of civilians, that it was written without Hamas and Gazans in mind. Hamas changed the manner of how wars are fought. One of the reasons the United States had such a difficult time in Vietnam is because we taught people in West Point about conventional warfare, which is, like the way you see it on the movie Braveheart, right? Where two armies, face off and then they go chase after each other and, kill each other, shoot each other. Hamas and Hezbollah, the Hezbollah war in 2009 that Israel fought, and the 2014 last battle with Hamas created something called asymmetric warfare. Asymmetries, fourth generation warfare. What is that? Well, both sides are not wearing uniforms. One side doesn't wear a uniform. One side looks like dentists. Hamas is not, they're not wearing, there's no way to know, that they're the terrorists versus the civilians. And you have a population, which we're not being honest about, in our coverage. Hamas was democratically elected. And the most recent polling before October 7th is that 65% of both West Bank Palestinians and Gazans would vote for Hamas then. After this stunning victory on October 7th, I'm sure that number is now 80%. So for all the talk about Hamas brutalizing its own people, yeah, they are. But you have a martyr mentality among the Gazans. Remember, the Gazans are the ancient Philistines. The story of Samson. They are a breed apart. They're a breed apart even from West Bank Palestinians. And they are very much committed to the killing of Jews. They love it. And this isn't about, for them, a two-state solution. This is not about borders or security fences or the status of Jerusalem or the political status of Arabs living in their own autonomous state. This is about what we hear, the river to the sea, which is, a genocidal song of annihilation to rid that entire area of Jews. That is the reason why Palestinians had rejected 5 peace offers that would have provided them with statehood. Bill Clinton, to this day, I interviewed him on an event years ago. To this day, he despises what happened at the end. Everyone remembers him for the Monica Lewinsky impeachment, but he remembers the end of his presidency where he offered Yasser Arafat 98% of what it was they were negotiating for. 98%. And Yasser Arafat left the negotiating table, and rather than come back and reject it or offer a counter offer, no, I want 99%, he started the second intifada, right? Clinton couldn't believe it, right? And people aren't, so when people are talking about, two-state solution, this is just preposterous. Israel would love for there to be, to not have to have this kind of a life. But the Palestinians clearly have never renounced violence, have never renounced the possibility that all of Israel would be returned to them in their mind. The country all belongs to them. In a country that would be Jewless, it's not just the Hamas charter, but even the Palestinian Authority has said that in a Palestinian state, no Jews would be allowed. So for all of the college courses in diversity, equity, and inclusion, why would you be on the side of people that are saying, not only do we believe in the genocide of Jews, but we wouldn't live next to them if we had our own country? The Geneva Convention just simply was never written with this kind of warfare involved, where, human shields are being used. Now, again, I've written about this for the Wall Street Journal. I was roundly criticized, but, I don't know how many of you have children now, young children, but it's not easy to tell parents, I'm going to put your kid on the roof and they're going to be the human shield when Israel's missiles hit. Most parents would say, you'd have to kill me first before I let you take my kid upstairs. So let's just be, I think, a little more intellectually honest that the Gazans, to a large extent, support the tactics of Hamas. And they, in this martyr mindset, believe that the next world is better than this world. And it's great to have a child be a shaheed. Now, I know when I say things like this, people go, what did you just say? The problem is that, you can't think in terms of the people that you know in Aventura, right? This is not Aventura. This is a different world. And it's a world that understands Sharia law in a different way. They understand what it means, the caliphate, in a different way. And they're true believers. So when it's not, when you hear the words Geneva Convention, you have to sort of ask yourself, yeah, but it was never written with this in mind. It always assumed that civilians did not want to be victims, that civilians did not want to be hijacked or kidnapped, that civilians would not allow their children to be used as cannon fodder. The strategy has worked, the civilian death strategy, because they know that MSNBC, BBC, the New York Times loves to take photos of mothers crying about dead children. We just don't know, we don't know what effect that's had. In the United States, if you leave a kid in a car in Miami with the windows up and go in for, pick up your laundry, a social worker is going to take the child away from you. But in Gaza, you get to be featured on MSNBC. It's a whole different mindset. You don't see protests. If Hamas is so brutal to their own people, why have we seen no protests against Hamas ever, anywhere? London, Madrid, Melbourne. Why isn't anyone? It's because people that support this Palestinian cause actually support Hamas. And they don't, that's why one of the reasons people are so frustrated that they don't see enough people condemning what Hamas did. Well, they actually believe that what Hamas did was legitimate resistance in a war against the Zionist enemy. Yes, to behead 40 babies and gang rape Jewish teenage girls is part of an act of resistance. And so it's maybe frustrating for some of you here who have wondered how come we don't hear enough denunciations. That's the reason, because they don't want to disparage Hamas. They actually think Hamas is doing the right thing because it's fighting against the Zionist entity. No one cares about the Hamas's charter. And all of a sudden, you have this dramatic shift from, as Mark said, from October 7th, where Israel is the victim, to where they now are participating in genocide. They're participating in genocide, but nobody's talking about the genocidal aims of the Hamas charter. No one's talking about that. People are saying the word ceasefire, but rockets are still flying from Gaza into Israel. There was an anecdote, which I guess I'll wait till later, that happened in 2014 about what Hamas understands is a ceasefire versus what we're asking Israel to do. So again, this twisted shift in the story where Israel is now committing acts of genocide, when in fact what they're doing, and the Biden administration is trying to continue to convey that truth, they're engaged in a war in self-defense. Where there is collateral damage. There is collateral damage that's significant because Hamas uses homes as command centers, and hospitals and mosques are places where missiles, rockets are hidden, and because of the use of human shields. The only reason why there are any civilian casualties in Gaza is because that's the fourth generation warfare that Hamas chooses to fight. They fight that warfare where they're surrounded by civilians with an end game, a strategy that they will win a PR war the more dead bodies pile up. And so that's why you're seeing this sort of, among other reasons, the main reason, anti-Semitism, to give a license to hate Jews by blaming Jews for a new blood libel. What's the blood libel now? It's not killing Christians in order to make matzah. It's killing Palestinian children in order to continue their colonization of stolen Arab land. That's the story. And the people that are cheering, that's the story they believe, right? They don't understand, or they don't care to understand, that Jews have a historical ancestral connection to the Holy Land. Just read the Old Testament. But I'll get back to that in a second. So let's talk about college campuses. Anyone, it might come as a big surprise to most people here today listening, but anyone who's been on a college campus over the last 20 years shouldn't be surprised at all. With the end of communism, Marxism taught on campus, Marxists changed their ideology to something called critical theory, the Frankfurt School, which is a post-World War II school that was what sort of picked up the elements of Marxism, but instead of an attack against the bourgeoisie, the attack now is against white colonialists. And so what you're seeing is a general philosophy that is focused on the white power structures and the oppression that it causes to people of color, which is why racism is the cause on a college campus. Racism is the cause of all problems, and all white people are required to accept their white privilege and quietly, show respect to people of color, because color provides instant virtue, and white skin is presumptively guilty. And this has been going on for many years. If you're not on a college campus, you would not have known this. The whole crusade on campus is very much an attack against the liberal culture that most people here grew up believing in. The principles of the Enlightenment: free speech, freedom of thought, free inquiry, independent judiciaries, the rights of women and gays, the rule of law. These are the principles of the 18th century Enlightenment. But on college campuses, this is the cursed ideology of white men that leverage these liberal principles to preserve their power and to colonize people of color. Now, how does this fit in with Israel? Israel, to them, is a white colonizing country. White people stole land from Arabs and have continued to maintain it. The reason that you hear the word, settler colonial enterprise is because what they're saying is that the Jews that live in Israel are not from there. They're settlers, not the settlers in the West Bank. All Jews, to them, are settlers. That's why UNESCO in the United Nations has repeatedly said there is no ancestral connection between Jews and the Holy Land. I mean, it's just so lunacy. I don't know. I always tell this little anecdote. Does anyone know how many times Jerusalem is mentioned in the Old Testament? Anyone know? You're muted. The answer is 677 times. 677 times Jerusalem is mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. Do you know how many times Jerusalem is mentioned in the Quran? Take a guess. 0. Not one. If Jerusalem is so important to you, put it in your book. It ought to be in your book. And if it's not in your book, yeah, we know Mecca and Medina is in your book. But how did it happen that you left Jerusalem out of your book, and yet Jews have no claim to the Holy Land in Jerusalem, and you have entire claim? So there is this shifting narrative to try to create, again, these oppressor versus victim binary equations: dark skin versus white skin, oppressed people versus colonized people. And Jews are white to them. No one wants to hear on campus that 50% of Israelis are actually people of color. 50% are Arabic. In the Mizrahi Jew is brown. If anyone's been to Israel, you know what I'm talking about. Forget Ethiopian Jews. The Mizrahi Jews are brown. And people don't recall or don't want to know. Yes, it's true that 800,000 Palestinians either left voluntarily at the recommendation of Arab countries in 1948, left Israel proper, and then after the first war, some Israelis kicked Arabs out. That's true. That's true. But you know what else is true? The exact same number, 800,000. It's crazy how that worked out, the math. Roughly the same number of Jews from Libya, Morocco, Iran, Algeria, Egypt were kicked out of their countries after the Six-Day War. Right? Now, where's their right of return? Does anyone say, I had a house in Morocco and I want it back? I had a house in Cairo and I want it back. Nobody wants to talk about those right of return. The only right of return anyone is talking about only involves the Palestinians. I always use another anecdote. None of you don't know, but 17 Wallowa Street is where my father grew up in Radom, Poland, right? My parents, I grew up in Miami Beach. If I told my parents that I was just going to sit in a refugee camp and hold the key to my father's house from Radom, Poland, and do nothing else and just be bitter and throw rocks and fly kites with fire on it, and if I would just do that, my parents would have broken my head with a rock, right? But it's only one group of refugees in the entire world. Palestinians are the only refugees that have their own UN entity that supervises their status. Every other refugee in the world is covered under a different category, a different agency. Only the Palestinians are privileged with their own. Why? Because they're allowed to remain as refugees forever. And why is that good? Because it's just a terrible black mark on Jews that they caused this refugee crisis. Every other refugee in the world under the United Nations charters and other founding documents are required to blend themselves in to their host country after one generation. That's it. You're done. Wherever you are, you have one generation to blend yourself in, except for the Palestinians, to create this eyesore that the world can point to against Israel. So that's the reason what you're seeing on campus, and the reason why you're seeing it in so expressed with a certain kind of hatred. It's because if you've been on campus, this, as I said, the world of wokeness, the politics of identity, anti-colonialism, all of these college ideas that really have been brainwashing our kids for a number of years now, in this hatred of white liberal culture, is fundamentally anti-American. It's not just illiberal. Yes, it's a liberal, but it's very anti-American, and it's also very anti-Zionist. And so you shouldn't be surprised when you hear people on college campuses screaming from the river to the sea. They mean it. They mean that Israel is a colonizer. They're white people that have no claims to the land at all, and that the power structure of white have displaced these Palestinians, and something must be done to return them to their country. The problem is there never was a country called Palestine. Never. Not once, not for a single day did an Arab people have a country called Palestine. Not for a single day. The only time there was a country on what's called Israel and the occupied territories, the last time there was a nation there, you know what was it called? The Kingdom of Judea. Yes. King David's kingdom was the last nation. And after King David, and this, remember, King David is roughly 150 years before the Greeks, the ancient Greeks. After that, that land has been occupied ever since then by the Greeks, the Romans, the Turks, the Byzantines, the Assyrians, the Turks, of course, eventually. Are you hearing the blowback, Mark? Somebody must have their microphone on.
Yeah, Mark, if you can mute Saul.
You all heard that? I just want to make sure that was done.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So the land, Mark, tell me when you're ready. Mark, you there?
Should be good now. Should be good now.
Okay. So the land has never not been occupied, right? And it was never called Palestine. In fact, the word Palestinian was created by the Romans, and you know what it was there to describe? Jews, not Arabs, Jews. So again, if you go on campus and you told people, if they would be willing to listen to you, that when you're saying we want to return the land that the Jews stole from the Arabs, it's utterly preposterous. There was never for a single day an Arab country with its own currency, its own flag, its own parliament, not for one single day. And as a longtime law professor, I can tell you that the West Bank and Gaza, the word occupied should never have been used. It was a strategic mistake by the Israelis during the Oslo negotiations. The land is disputed. I'm perfectly happy for peace. I would be very happy for there to be a Palestinian nation that could live side by side with Jews. But if you're asking me, and I'm not a real estate lawyer, but I am a longtime law professor, if you're asking me to argue legal title, the Jews have it. If you want me to, I can't do it today, but you can bring me back another day, and I can make the argument for, if you really wanted to go that direction, do you really want to go and get legalistic? The Jews actually have better legal title to Gaza and the West Bank. That doesn't mean the Israelis weren't prepared to give a statehood nation, a statesmanship to the Palestinians 5 different times in the past. And I certainly agree with that. But it's not because the country is being returned to the Arabs from which it was stolen. But on campus, the last thing I would say about this is it's not just the idea of treating Jews as privileged white people that have no claim on the West Bank. There's also a sort of bizarre distortion of moral clarity, right? It's as if what we're being told on October 8th, and you're seeing this now, the reason we don't condemn Hamas is because in some bizarre way, the killing of babies is an act of resistance. It's a legitimate act of resistance. And that's what people are saying when they are pulling down the pictures of the kidnapped children. That's what they're telling you. They won't be honest about it, but what they're really telling you is these people don't belong there, and that no matter what age they are targets of resistance. And so we have no sympathy for them. We don't want to confuse the world by thinking that the Palestinians are barbarians or that crimes were committed against Jews. The only focus is the crimes are only committed by Jews against Palestinians. And again, what you see on campus is that all of these ideas are protected under freedom of speech and academic freedom. However, are you ready for this? When guys like me visit your campus and make a Zionist case, I get shouted down, people bang on the tables because I'm an Islamophobe and a racist. So there's freedom of speech if you want to make the case for Palestinians, and it's racism and Islamophobia if you try to make the case for anti-Semitism. What does that tell you? A complete breakdown in liberal culture. Free speech in one direction, only double standards with respect to Israel everywhere. Let's go now to the city streets. What's going on in the city streets? Well, I don't know if I'm going to surprise you with this. The vast majority of the people in universities in these demonstrations and in Madrid and in London and Berlin, they're Muslims. There's been a huge migration of Muslims from the Middle East that have carried with them an Islamist form of anti-Semitism. And so this is new to Americans. What you saw last week, I like to call the Arab street finally showed up in the United States. If you lived in Paris, you would have seen this for the last 20 years. If you were a Parisian Jew, I travel around and I tell anecdotes about what's been happening to the Parisian Jews at the hands of Muslims that live in France. No one believes me. And if you talk to European Jews, they can't believe how insulated American Jews have been largely. Because remember, there's only one part of the world where you can get thousands of people to go to a town square and shout, "Death to Jews, gas the Jews, death to America, death to the Pope, death to British novelists, death to Danish cartoonists." There's only one people that do that. And so that level of intense, enmity, and again, the language, death, death is always like death to death. So the good news is that it's not like the return of neo-Nazis are causing this level of protest in Europe. What you're really seeing is what we have here: progressives, university faculty, certain levels of progressive intellectuals, and Islamists. This is why the French have troubles with the no-go zones. Stockholm, good luck to you. Stockholm is completely now, all of these countries have inherited a little of the Arab street. So of course, Israel's attacking of Gaza was going to inflame those communities around the world. There was no question. You could have easily predicted it. The more that Israel started to bomb and now the incursion into Gaza, you would find those cities that hold a lot of, guess which country in Europe has nothing like this. Here's a paradox, given the fact that
Germany.
no, Germany has a lot, Jeff.
Oh,
Poland,
yeah.
Poland doesn't let anybody in. You can't, if you're not Catholic, good luck to you. So Poland,
So
ironically,
you were asking a different question, Professor.
yeah, no, I'm just saying that they have a role. Poland played a big role in the Holocaust, but they don't have anything to do with this. You can't point your finger at Poles. But Germany, no. Germany, remember, Angela Merkel was very, very willing to provide a refuge for as many Syrian refugees as possible. So, these cities, it's the dark little secret. There are not many people. There are not many people who are crazy enough, like me, to speak truth to audiences, because you in my situation, you just end up getting death threats. But if we really took a real critical look at all the cities in which you saw these eruptions of anti-Zionist animus, they're all largely, again, they're intellectuals, they're faculty members, but largely Muslims who have migrated the Arab Street into other countries like Europe and now possibly the United States. I'm worried that any day now, you're going to see the burning of American flags. This, you're going to see, you get ready, strap yourself in. It could, in fact, get worse. Burning of American flags. We now know that President Biden has been threatened this weekend because, by Rashida Tlaib. So, that explains, and again, it explains it, but it's so horrific to think that, you're hearing phrases like gas the Jews, right? Hamas, Jews to the gas. This has provided a license to hate and kill Jews under the guise of human rights for Palestinians. The last category, and then we'll take questions, is the Biden administration. The Biden administration, you've got to give them credit. So far, they've said all the right things. If they were asking my opinion, I would have had them say more. But they've said a lot. President Biden was very clear. We stand behind our ally. We have Israel's back. Full stop. I don't know what that means, but he kept saying the word full stop. But you're seeing that erosion, and you're going to see that erosion because the Biden State Department is largely made up of the same people behind the Iran deal under President Obama. And the State Department has historically had an Arabist orientation. And it was in 2014, it was Barack Obama who said, I have Israel's back. And very quickly, he went to the word restraint. Israel must restrain itself. Why? Because there was disproportionate death. There were far more dead Palestinians than there were dead Israelis. Well, I already talked about why that is. It's a civilian death strategy. It's intended to get more Palestinian deaths. And nobody is willing to sort of recognize, the moral dilemma that Israel is faced with. How do you fight a war where you're not able to kill civilians as casualties because you're being treated as if you're committing genocide? By the way, let me just briefly say, you know that the Holocaust is an act of genocide, but there was also an Armenian genocide and a Rwandan genocide and a Bosnian genocide and a Cambodian genocide, right? You all know that, right? Do you know what they all have in common?
General.
One thing in common, they all have less people than they had before the genocide. That's the rule in genocide. Do you know that the Palestinian population has more than doubled since the quote occupation? You can't double and call yourself the victim of genocide. Only Palestinians get to make that claim. No other people. It's an insult to all the other countries where people were subjected to mass murder. So what you should be looking out for in the shifting, changing winds of this narrative is we're hearing the word ceasefire. We're hearing words humanitarian corridors. We're making words up. These are words that didn't have meaning before. Humanitarian corridor. You know what the problem with the humanitarian corridor is? Yes, it's true that Israel has maintained a blockade. Not a Jew has lived in Gaza since 2005. But Israel has maintained the air and sea blockade because the Gazans don't seem to want to import books. They just want to import the materials, the raw materials to make weapons and tunnels. But you know, the blockade is also enforced by Egypt in the south. You never hear that. I don't know how many of you knew that, but I'm telling you, it's not just Israel's blockade, it's Egypt's blockade. Why would they do that? Why would the Egyptians blockade fellow Arabs? What do you think? The Gazans are nuts. That they don't want terrorists. They're part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they've got President Sisi's got it worked out in Egypt, and he's scared of what it would be like to possibly bring in Gazans to live there. It makes no sense. All these Arab countries, gigantic land, none of them want these people. They're there as symbols of Jewish oppression of Arabs. No one really cares about the Palestinians. If they did, they would do something for the Palestinians. They won't even let them through the border in Egypt. And again, Egypt is also the nation that maintains its own blockade. One last thing, and then I'll be done. So why restraint? Why ceasefire? Because this idea comes from the Bible, Deuteronomy, Exodus, and Leviticus, an eye for an eye. People really don't understand what an eye for an eye means. People think it means bloodthirsty. It means the opposite. It actually means it's not for barbarians, it's for accountants, CPAs. It means precision. If you take my eye, I'm entitled to the value of an eye, not more and not less. Why does it say life for life, limb for limb, eye for an eye? It's there for measure for measure. The world of proportionality is the world that kept humanity surviving, because people knew this. You can go back to the story of Jacob and the rape of Dinah. It's in book of Genesis. The rape of Dinah is the very first story of proportionality, right? And what is the consequences of taking too much, taking more than an eye plus. In the Bible, it teaches you there, if you go beyond what you're entitled to, you're going to get recycling of revenge. There's going to be a retaliation, and it's never going to end tit for tat. You know what the problem is with an eye for an eye in wartime? It's really hard to get precision. And no one really knows. There was a West Wing episode devoted to this. There's a scene from the movie, the Steven Spielberg movie, Munich, with Golda Meir. There's a scene that's just about what I'm talking to you now. You know, I've been noticing these things in culture where there's scenes about, well, what is proportionate? Well, what would be proportionate is if Israelis went into Gaza, took 40 Palestinian babies and cut their heads off. Jews don't do that. Jews don't. You're not going to get them to do that. It's just not what we do. We do other things, but we don't do that. We don't gang rape girls and then tear their limbs off, slice off their breasts, and then drag them from motorcycles on streets. That's what happened on October 7th. Let's just, no one wants to start. I've been doing, TV stuff for the last month, and I always start with that. I start with that thing, and I go, and they go, do you want to say anything else? I say, there's nothing else to say. Doesn't that say everything you need to know? And so the problem is, what is proportionate? 1,400 lives, but the way they were taken, it's a complicated story. The one thing is for sure, Israel can no longer live with Hamas as a neighbor. They might be able to live with Gazans as a neighbor, except that I'm worried that the Gazans will find some other terrorist organization to come in, because Palestinians, one thing they're really good at, they have great patience. They'll wait forever. They'll wait forever. They never get bored. They never say, you know what? Let's look at it this way. If Bill Clinton had gotten what he thought, he would have been the greatest statesman of our generation. If Arafat had accepted the peace deal in 2000, and you know what we would have had right now? Let's do the math. 24 years of a Palestinian country. What a waste. What a waste. You could have been a country for 24 years and you didn't do it. Why? Because I don't want to live with Jews. I have no interest. I want them dead. And my grandfather had a house in Tel Aviv or Haifa, and I want that back. And so, this is the one thing about when you're going to hear the word proportionality, and you will start hearing it, what you're going to hear is this idea. Israel has now killed more than 1,400 people. Hamas is estimating, you can never trust their numbers, but they're estimating 10,000 Palestinians are killed. Any day now, any minute now, you are going to hear the word proportionality. And when you do, please remember what I said. This goes back to the Bible, eye for an eye, except eye for an eyes don't work in war. And it's very hard to know what is a proportionate response. There's a wonderful scene in that movie Munich, and then I'll stop. There's a wonderful scene in that movie Munich with Golda Meir when, after the killing of the Israeli Olympic team, she meets with her war cabinet and one of the IDF, chief of staff. She says, "What have we done?" And he said, "We bombed the PLO base in Jordan and one in Lebanon, and we killed 400 Palestinians." And then she turns to them, "Okay, what are we going to do again? What are we going to do next?" And they turn to her and they said, "Madam Prime Minister, we just told you what we did. We bombed and we killed 400 people. They killed 18 of our athletes, and we just killed 400. Golda Meir did not think 400 was an eye for an eye. And I'm telling you, Bibi Netanyahu does not think 10,000 is the same as what happened in the 1400 who were killed. And the last thing I would just simply say, you're going to get, strap yourself in. You're going to hear a lot more global condemnation, but it's not new. It's the same condemnation that the United Nations has been, leveling against Israel since 1948. The Jewish diplomats know this. They expect this. They recall ambassadors. It's an ongoing double standard. And part of that double standard, even in the context of the Abraham Accords, is there because you might say, wait a minute, Israel has had a historic peace treaty with Egypt and Jordan. Why are the presidents of Egypt and Jordan condemning Israel? I thought they're friends. They are friends. But you know what they're scared of? The Arab street. Everyone lives in terror of the Arab street. I am sure that Sisi, the king of Jordan, the countries that signed the Abraham Accords, they don't like Hamas. Hamas is doing the bidding of Iran. They're terrorists. The Abraham Accord countries want to do business with Israel. They want tourism. They want opportunities to invest in high tech and biotech. They hate Hamas, but they publicly can't say it because everyone lives in fear of the Arab street. All right, gang, that summed it up.
Thane, thank you so much. I have a few questions from some of the people in the chat, and please write what you'd like. But I'm going to take personal privilege and ask this question. Using your crystal ball, it's December the 6th, 2023, 1 month from today. What does the world look like according to you?
Well, when the killing took place in Wisconsin, as tragic as it was it last week? I knew immediately Israel was off the table for 2 days. Americans, the news cycle is every 10 minutes. And we just, we go from sensational story. If you watch the news after that Wisconsin tragedy, Israel was a very small story. Donald Trump is not really getting, sucking all the oxygen out anymore. So I don't know. I think a lot of it will have to do with what else is happening on December 6th. But I'll tell you this, Mark, Israel won't be done. There will be arguments between Israel and the Biden administration, for sure. Netanyahu's already made it clear, ceasefire my ass. We don't give a ceasefire when we've got them on the run. They've got 300 miles of tunnels. If we give them a ceasefire, they're going to move hostages and weapons to different parts of the tunnel. And in 2014, there's a great anecdote when Obama was pressuring Netanyahu for a ceasefire, and he was reluctant to give it, and he finally gave it. Within an hour, you can look this up, within an hour, a Hamas soldier came through a tunnel in Israel, tried to kidnap an Israeli soldier, couldn't because the Israeli soldier was fighting him off, and he simply killed the Israeli soldier and then escaped back into the tunnel and went back to Gaza. And I'll never forget what Bibi said. He said, "Never again am I going to let someone who has no clue about this region tell me what I should do in this region." Barack Obama's specialty was the faculty lounge at the University of Chicago and Hawaii. That's what he knew really well. Hawaii and the faculty lounge. That is not the world of the Middle East. And I totally understood what Netanyahu said. Who the hell are you? Who the hell are you to tell me I know what a ceasefire means to Hamas, and it doesn't mean the same thing. And an Israeli soldier was killed because of your ceasefire that Hamas would have no interest in abiding by. So anyway, Mark, all I could say is it won't be over, because this ground incursion is designed to do what Golda Meir wanted to do after the Olympics, right? Anyone remotely responsible for what happened on October 7th needs to be hunted down and killed. Not about numbers. It's not about 10,000 versus, they're saying if you've got blood on your hands, if you raped one of those Israeli girls, if you put one of those little babies in an oven, I have an essay coming out today. By the way, if any of you are interested in my essays, you should just email me, and then I put you on the listserv at Thane@ThaneRosenbaum.com. The essays during the wartime are now coming out every week. They normally come out every 2 weeks. And I forgot what I was going to say about that essay. 2 nouns that should never be used in a sentence that Hamas used in a sentence. You know what it is? Jews and ovens. They actually put Jewish babies in an oven. And I can just say, as a child of survivors, those are 2 words that should never be used casually. And Hamas knew exactly what they were doing. We believe in ovens, and we're going to show you. Babies fit inside the ovens, and we'll just roast them. And so, those are extraordinary crimes, barbaric crimes. And I don't think Israelis are going to think that the disproportion is going to bother them. I think they're going to say, we don't care about the fraction. We don't care about the numerator and denominator. We're coming after you. And if you're a terrorist that's from Gaza and you are in any way complicit, we're not stopping until justice is done.
Thank you, Thane. Is there anything that we can do about the public perception about Israel's right to defend itself? What should we be telling our friends who aren't picking a side?
Well, the first thing, again, is the part that I didn't do for you, but I did for the shul up in Surfside, which is that Jews have ceded the moral high ground to people who commit these crimes, which is crazy. So that they have been throwing out words like apartheid, ethnic cleansing, genocide, occupation, settler colonialist enterprises. None of them apply. That's what the words that are being screamed. Now, I know that if I gave you a test, a little quiz, most of you, and I love you dearly, smart Jews from Miami, but you'd fail my test. You wouldn't know how to answer any of it. It's okay. Most Jews can't answer that. It's fine. Nothing personal. Doesn't mean you're not a genius. I think you're a genius. You just never studied this. The idea that we're letting people in an unrebutted, protests use words so casually that have nothing to do with Israel and its moral dilemma, that's one thing. Do I think it would make a difference, Mark? I don't know. Because again, the green light is out. We've normalized anti-Semitism. We've figured out a new way to deploy it. It's not about making matzah. It's about the killing. I've been talking about, I've written about this. There's a woman that teaches at Rutgers. She's a professor. She's an imbecile. She's Muslim, and she could not be a bigger imbecile, and she can't write one English sentence. But she won a book award called The Right to Maim. And she's considered a hero on campuses. You know what the right to maim is? It accuses the IDF, Israel Defense Forces, of stealing the organs of Palestinians, migrating the organs of Palestinians, deliberately maiming the children, and poisoning the water. And she speaks around the country on campus because she gets a now there's no empirical research in her book. And when people like me say, well, where do you get your facts? She goes, well, it's symbolically true. The real key is to make, so she's literally saying, I'm lying. I'm a liar. I have a new blood libel. It's not making matzah. It's deliberately stealing the organs of Palestinians and selling it on the open market. If she's going to get a book award and get standing ovations, Mark, I'm not sure that having a more educated and informed Jewish American public can stop that, because she's getting standing ovations wherever she goes.
Thane, what are the best sources for getting the most accurate information? What do you think for getting the most accurate information about what's happening in Israel? What would you recommend?
Read Thane Rosenbaum.
There you go.
That was
a law. That was a softball law.
That was a softball. That was just hanging out there waiting.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Look, the one thing that I would say is that, the mainstream media is not the place to go. Certainly the New York Times, certainly the Washington Post. When people say to me, and in fact, this essay that's coming out today, I talk about Kristallnacht and the 1930s. Because people today, Jews, as you know, that's why you showed up, all of you today, they're worried, they're nervous. They're saying, I've never seen anti-Semitism like this in my lifetime. I'm sure many of you are going to say that. That's why I tuned to Thane Rosenbaum. Otherwise, I would watch something else. But I actually feel that I've never seen anything like that. But it is like that, but it's not the 30s, right? I mean, Israel has one of the great armies of the world. But there are differences. During the Holocaust, you did not see people cheering the killing of Jews. That's worse today. There were not protests all over the world. You go, Hitler, way to go, gas the babies, Jewish babies. But I'll tell you what we didn't have. We didn't have Fox News or Newsmax or other conservative media. Nothing like that existed. None of these people are Jews. They're not Jews. To me, Jake Tapper and Wolf Blitzer should have been given the treatment of Spinoza years ago. They're not Jews. I don't care what anyone says. I know them both. They're not Jews. They're not Jews. Yeah, they make a lot of money at CNN. My good friend Ari Melber, he's a good friend of mine. I don't think he's really Jewish, but these other networks, and also evangelical Christians, you've got to love them. They love Israel. They get this concept. They're liberal in the sense that they're able to make moral distinctions. This is evil and this is good. We're being taught in moral relativism. What is moral relativism on campus? Who's to say that you're a better culture than another culture? There are people on campus right now. I know this will be a shock to you. This is what they will say with no irony. This is what they'll say. Look, this sect of Arabs, Palestinians, they like to cut off heads. What are we to do about that? That's their culture. We like hot dogs at Yankee games. That's our culture. Who are we? We're not imperialists. We're not ethnocentric. We're afraid to make moral judgments. We're afraid to violate the politics of identity. We've created an idea that all cultures are relative. They all have equal value. No, they don't. I'm okay of saying, no. If you're cutting off babies, you're not in our century. And I'm not prepared to say that this is a cultural construct. And let's remember, polling is pretty clear. The vast majority of Muslims around the world, so when people say, this sounds Islamophobic, it's not Islamophobic. There's 1.6 billion Muslims in the world, and a majority of them believe in a strict adherence to Sharia law. So even though this upset Ben Affleck, and he looked like an imbecile on Bill Maher years ago, and I think he is an imbecile, but he got very upset. But the reality is there are 900 million people in this world that believe in stonings, beheadings, dismemberments, and lashings. They believe in it. And they practice it. That's not all people, but 900 million of the 1.6 do. And so, that is I can't remember what that last question was, Mark, and I don't know if I answered it. Do you remember what you just said? I don't know if I tied that up.
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
And I have one last question, Thane, for this evening.
Now, these
And
are
it's
not
from a
all coming
parent
from
of
you,
I-
right? You're not hogging these questions, right?
I would never hog all the questions. I'm taking them from the chat. That's not me, Thane. You know
I
me
know,
better than
I'm
that.
kidding. I'm just reminding.
I know,
that
I know, I
These
know.
people have
Thane,
asked these questions.
Thane, this is from a parent of a Cornell student who has
Yeah.
gotten a real education. And at the end of her question, she asked, is there hope? Do you believe that there's hope for the Jews of America or even America itself? Is there a sense, can we be right to have a sense of optimism at some point after all of this?
For the last 8 years, we have been lining up for a race war. I have been predicting dark clouds. I always joke around. Nobody invites me to speak unless they're expecting bad news. I'm the deliverer of bad news. That's what I do. We are, even with the refugee open border in the South, we are setting ourselves up for a gigantic race war. What I said to you before about what's happened on campuses is moving off campus. The hatred of America, the hatred of white liberal culture. I am skeptical. I am skeptical. I was very shocked by the scenes of the last several weeks on campuses. I live in Brooklyn, but I did not go to Times Square. I wouldn't have felt safe there. I have a daughter in one of the schools that has one of those, gigantic, daily vigils. I see university presidents afraid to denounce Hamas. Everyone is afraid to be called an Islamophobe or a racist. They live in terror. The faculty, the administration live in terror. I very much applaud the Wall Street bankers, the Bill Ackmans and the Mark Rowans. They're heroes of mine that said, I've been saying this for years. Stop writing checks. These schools hate Jews. Stop writing checks. And people would look at me like I'm crazy. They're saying, well, if I stop writing a check, my kid won't be at legacy admission. And I want to make sure that they can get into a good college. But look what's happened. The faculties have running the prison, and the presidents are living in fear of faculties and students of being called a white supremacist or being called a white colonialist. So I'm sorry, I had terrible news for the Cornell students, but I just don't see how this fixes itself. And you know why? Because Israel's going to win this thing. They're going to win this thing. And that's only going to get it worse. It's not going to fix itself. It won't correct itself. Israel will win this thing. Maybe it could pick up Saudi Arabia to join the Abraham Accords. Maybe that would be perfect. But the craziness within Islam, here's something that you should all know. You probably don't. You guys are a Reform shul, right? I don't know, are there Reconstructionist shuls in Miami Beach also, or in Miami? Not really. So there's Orthodox, there's Chabad. Let me get this straight. I'm not that religious. Help me through this. There's Orthodox, there's Chabad, there's conservative. That was Menorah when I was a kid. I don't know if that's still Temple Menorah conservative. Beth Shalom was always reformed in those days. And then there's Reconstructionist. In 1962 or 6, I can't remember, the Catholic Church created something called Vatican II. You know what Vatican II was about? Take a good look at our book, the New Testament, and update it so that we don't believe in crazy shit. We don't believe in blood libels. Let's not look like imbeciles. Let's take a look and reform our book and new teachings so that we don't claim that Jews actually make matzah with blood, because matzah sucks on its own. It doesn't need blood. So just stop thinking stupid shit, right? Islam refuses reform. You can't even look at the book. You can't touch the book. You can't do anything with the book. So when people talk about moderate Muslims, I go, no, that's not who you want. You want to support reformed Muslims, Muslims that want to take a good look at their book and say, you know what, stonings, beheadings, lashings, dismemberments, not good.
Well, Thane, I knew what I was getting tonight when we got you. I knew it, and you delivered as I knew you would. You make us think. It's provoking. It's really it makes us look at the situation in a really different way. And I invite you to come back. We'll get you back again because we love having you. Those of you that don't know, Thane was our Blaustein family scholar in residence, and he covered many topics because he is able to do that. Tonight we focused on of course Israel, but Thane is a tremendous writer, lecturer, speaker, professor, analyst, everything else. And so on behalf of everyone here at Temple Beth Shalom Thane, we want to thank you so much for being with us and educating us tonight.
Thank you all. Miss you all, Miami Beach people. Bye-bye.
Thank you, thanks.
Take care, everyone. Good night, and thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Mark.